And well, I learned martial arts as a kid growing up, and so I block her. And then she tries it on the other side, and I block her. And she looks down at her arms, and she goes, "Ow, you hit me." And I'm just like dumbfounded. Hi everyone, so this is one of 5 intro videos for launching my channel. And what this is going to be is kind of a little bit of story time. I also have to introduce who this person is for a moment, and we will do that really quickly. But first I need to tell you what we're doing. So what we're doing is this is going to be a story time that is from my life. Because as a kind of neurodivergent, trans, queer, not really elder, but like person who's been around the block, kind of elder from certain perspectives, I think it's really important to learn from my perspective and to learn from what has happened to me. And who better to contribute to me telling my story than my wife, Fox?
Is that my
Your
intro
cue.
thing?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Fox. I am this lovely, lovely human being's wife. I'm just here to basically be the biggest wife guy on the internet because I love her so much. We've been together for, gosh, almost 9 years now, which is insane. Time really does fly. So, without further ado, story time with Ria.
Yay. So, I guess for this, I really want to kind of tell my personal story in relation to kind of the intersections of my neurodivergent experience and my trauma narrative and kind of how those have come together. You might have heard me talk about this before on another channel, but I want that to live on my channel. And also, as you grow and change, these stories gain new context. You gain new understanding. So even if you've heard this before, I think that you'll appreciate, one, a different editor's hand in editing it, but two, also kind of what I've learned the more that I've done that. And Fox is right. We've been together for a very long time. We grew up together. The reason why I kind of picked this world is because it's very cozy. It feels kind of like a home, and it's kind of like inviting you into our lives to an extent. And that's why I felt like this was a very appropriate world to pick for this kind of experience. So let's start kind of at the beginning with my trans trauma, all of neurodivergent narrative that we're going to be talking about. I think my first trans memory was when I was very young. I remember specifically I was sitting in a McDonald's parking lot eating chicken McNuggies, and my father had the radio
Nuggies.
on. Yes, I was an autist even then, but my father had the radio on, and the song Lola by the Kinks came on, and you know that part in it where it says like, "I know what I am, I'm a man, and so is Lola." And throughout the song before that, it's been describing this beautiful woman. And I kind of look at my dad and I'm like, "You can do that? That's a thing that you can do? What?" And he had sadly disparaging things to say about trans people, which is sad, but he got better in the end, even if it took him a while. But that was kind of the very beginning. And I knew that was something to hide. And I know, Fox, that you can relate because of the whole autistic hiding thing, because like these narratives have a lot of overlap. And that's why I really want to highlight that. Knowing that, hey, you feel like an other, you feel like something's different, you feel like something's wrong, and that it isn't safe to like really talk about.
Yeah, I think on my end, I didn't really have to hide the gender stuff as much because being one assigned female at birth, there's a little bit more leeway to explore gender. So I've always been very gender non-conforming. I'm non-binary, and my parents were kind of like, huh, when I first told them, but very accepting of it. So there's that. And then to again having like that really accepting family just inherently. So I feel like the gender stuff was not something I really had to hide, but autism on the other hand, and ADHD as well to an extent, like having to mask who I really am behind all of that, definitely I think there's a lot of parallels.
Mm-hmm. And I also, you kind of learn from society that it is not something that is desired. Like, I saw Jerry Springer and I saw people like me that were hit, people like me that were like
Yeah.
abused. Yeah, and I kind of picked that up, that this is something like, the whole conceal, don't feel. Regarding kind of the neurodivergent stuff, I was always a really awkward kid that was treated like an other. When I was in middle school, there was a yearbook kind of like pick a person for a role thing related to movies. And I got picked most likely to be in a horror movie because I would be the monster.
That's so messed up.
Yeah. Treated like you are less than because you're being different and that you don't understand the social cues and things of that nature is really also like another parallel. I kind of want to go on a different tangent before I really get into my gender stuff like really heavy and kind of talk about my stuff with my mom.
Mm-hmm.
My mother was sadly a person that abused me physically, emotionally, on all ways that you can basically be abused except sexually. And when I talk about my mom, I kind of tell the story about how I left my mom because it highlights everything that was kind of happening with that relationship and why it wasn't good. Also, it's a unique experience of also highlighting how it was neurodivergent hell, particularly autism, ADHD, like my neurodivergencies, on how it is hell to experience what I experienced.
Yeah.
So I lived in an environment where my mom ran a kitten and puppy mill in our single ranch home. Basically, it was an environment that was sensory hell from an autistic perspective. Constant smells, constant chaos, constant texture, unwell. Basically, my sense of safety from my sensory perspective was constantly on fire. But I say that she ran the kitten and puppy mill, but actually, she made me run the kitten and puppy mill because she made me do all of the chores for like managing 30 plus animals in a single home with outside and inside like
Oh my
combined.
God.
Yeah, mostly cats, but we had like constant litters of puppies as well. As an autistic kid, I didn't really understand how to do like certain cleaning tasks very well, and I would try to do the same thing that I did before. And then with the ADHD, the executive function of trying to figure out what she wasn't saying was just like, I felt like I was playing Who's on First constantly with my experience of being in that space.
It definitely doesn't help that she was constantly moving the goalposts either, which is something that is really, really hard, I imagine, for any child, but especially a neurodivergent child, right? You're trying to figure out what they mean in the first place, and then they just keep on changing the expectations on you, and you have no way of knowing that until they're mad.
My mom, for example, sometimes cleaning a cat box one way would be acceptable, and then other times she'd literally want every single possible pellet of used litter out of a litter box. And I never knew which one it was going to be, whether it was the, hey, just get it good enough, or hey, make it
Mm-hmm.
perfect. And one time, like for example, and this sounds very unsanitary to say, but she beat me with a cat scoop. And so
Gross.
yeah,
Ugh.
it's really gross.
I'm also just over here like screams in public health worker.
Yeah. By the way, we didn't say it, but their pronouns are they, she. We should probably like, just let y'all know, audience.
Fishy.
Yeah. I just realized it. But anyway, back to kind of the story. I didn't know where I stood kind of in my home world because of this. I didn't know where I stood in my school life because of the extreme bullying I was experiencing. And I didn't know where I stood because of gender stuff, because I just felt like I wasn't able to interface with anybody, because I was like, I describe when you are a trans person that is trying to interface with like people as the gender you were assigned at birth instead of the gender you are. It kind of feels like there's like this film between you and other people that like you can't, like, it's like cling wrap. It's like you can see the other side, but like you can't get like through it. And so I had all these different
Mm-hmm.
intersecting ways on how basically I felt like an other, and I felt like I was less than, and I was undesired, and how I was not able to be seen as worthy or loved or cared for. Add the fact that add the fact that she also withheld love and had this emotional kind of push pull, like make me chase affection. Like, it was this environment that I honestly didn't know a true like secure attachment until like I had you, darling. And for the audience,
Aw, baby.
mm-hmm. And for the audience, a secure attachment, what that basically is. Oh, I guess I should also say my father was unavailable and like emotionally, and that, standard guy in America.
Dealing with men stuff. Gosh, yeah.
Yeah. But for the audience who, if you don't know, a secure attachment is basically like a secure base that you feel like you have a person or a group of people, depending on what the attachment is like. It usually is a family member in youth, but as you age, it's usually a romantic partner. But it's this place where you know that no matter what, you have like a safe harbor where everything is going to be okay. And that is so needed for good psychological health and development.
Yeah, and something that we say to each other all the time if one of us is having a rough day or week, or we're just feeling sad or displaced or whatever, is we tell each other, "Hey, you're my home." It's like saying you're my rock. Feeling of this person is going to be there absolutely no matter what happens. And you can trust that. There's no doubt, because we've known each other for so long. We've been together for so long, while having that good reinforcement of, no, but really, I'm not going anywhere. As queer, neurodivergent, trans people, it's something that a lot of us don't get as early as we deserve, but it's something that is really wonderful to experience a little bit later in life. And it's so, so, so important for us. And, like Ria was saying, that attachment can come from a romantic partner. It can also come from a platonic partner if you don't have a romantic partner. It can come from a very, very close friend, somebody who you think of as family, even though they weren't born into your family that you had from the beginning of your existence,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Just because you have a bad early start doesn't mean that that's destiny. And that's actually part of why I'm kind of talking about this, is that I want you to learn that even through these like terrible things that I'm going to be
Mm-hmm.
describing, there is light on the other end of the tunnel. You can,
Yeah.
there's that trope of, oh, it gets better. Lol, yeah, right. But like it does though. It takes time.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, to kind of talk about how there are narratives, and notice that these two narrative, or three, I guess, kind of narratives we're talking about like the neurodivergent, we're talking about the trans, we're talking about the trauma. Like all of these narratives, they build and build and have these interweaving themes, and we're going to talk about what that does later after I kind of say more about that. But notice how like the I want you to, as you listen to me, to kind of like pick up on like how all of these things like mesh together. So with my stuff with my mom, I ended up like going through an event that led to me leaving her home, and I feel like it sums everything up. So one night I was playing RuneScape with my best friend kind of at my side, kind of similar where Fox is. Like if I'm sitting at the computer, my best friend was kind of where Fox is right now.
I'm also really amused because we just aged ourselves so much by talking about RuneScape.
Yeah. By the way, we've known each other, like we said we've been together for like 9 years almost. We've known each other since I was 17 and they were 14. Like that's how long we've known each
Yeah.
other. But this person that was not Fox was sitting next to me. My mom wanted to like play because she also played, and she was trying to get me to come off the computer. And I said, "Okay, mom, like let me just kind of negotiate this trade," because it was before the auction house, and you know, that was just how the game worked back then. And I did that, and she came up behind me and she's like, "Is it my turn?" I was like, "Yeah." And so I was kind of like leaning back to get out of my seat. And my mom said, "You better not run over my foot, dead name." And I was like, "Okay." And so my friend who was sitting right there says that I was nowhere near her feet. But when I came up, she went, "Ow!" And smacked me across the face. She had a lit cigarette in her hand, and my friend like freaked out because didn't really like in the moment you'd be like you think, "Oh god, this person's being burned," even though with the physics that like would put it out. But you don't know that as a high schooler.
I mean, honestly, I would still react that way if somebody tried to slap somebody else with a lit cigarette, even though I know that that wouldn't happen that way physically.
Yeah. And my friend or my mom screams, "Get the F out of my house," because my friend screamed, what the F, like almost simultaneously, like this was happening. And he leaves, and the house is kind of structured like if you see my arms, we had kind of like two hallways, and where I am is like the middle point. It was like a horseshoe. And there was this door in the middle where like if you tried to slam it, it was one of those really light doors that would just went it's like you could slam it and it just wouldn't actually like do anything because it was hollow in the middle, like you just couldn't do anything with it. It wouldn't slam. And he just slams it so hard the thing goes off the hinges. I'm crying because I've been slapped, but like I hear this loud noise I wasn't expecting, and my mom wasn't expecting it either. And we just kind of look at each other like, "What?" And so I go to follow him, and the door won't open because he knocked it off its hinge properly. He pushed the knob in so hard that the knob went through the door slightly. Like we thought that we were trapped because we couldn't get to the other side of the house where the exit is. And he hears us like yell like, "Whoa!" Like, and so he pauses, he comes back, he picks the door up and turns, and it opens. And he and I spend the night outside testing if my mom has gone to bed because the dial up internet signal would be used or not used. And that's how we knew would it be safe to go in and actually go to sleep.
Once again, dating ourselves by talking about dial-up internet.
Yeah. Well, they know that I'm a a millennial and all of that. So, but yes, we are dating ourselves. And then to kind of like speed through the story a little bit, my mom woke me up at 9 o'clock, even though at 3 o'clock was when she went to bed. So we only really got 5 hours of good sleep, and basically told me that I had to fix the door, even though I'm like this freshman in high school and have no idea how to do that. But my friend actually was in construction. So he takes the door, he puts it off its hinges, he levels it out, he makes it better than it was before, with the exception of the fact that the around the doorknob is kind of messed up. And so she just kind of
Mm-hmm.
says, "Well, oh, well, you'll have to just pay for that, I guess," to both of us. And we're just kind of like, uh, and I want to highlight this kind of sense of unease, of never knowing what to expect. This is what my mom did to me. This is what being autistic and not understanding how the world worked did to me. That was like the memory issues and like executive function issues with being neurodivergent did to me. Like I had all of these things that just made me feel off kilter. And so again, more points in like how all of these things are aligned, how all of these things have similarities. And then later that night, to fast forward, my mom was trying to get me to basically get him on the phone to deal with an issue that is related to this story, but is ultimately an unimportant detail. And she was trying to make me get him on the phone. So I'm like trying to get him on the phone and be like, hey, my mom wants to like talk to you about stuff. And he's like, okay, well, let me talk to her. And I say, hey, he wants to talk to you. It's like, no, you need to just get him to get what I want. I don't want to talk to one of your stupid little friends, dead name. And I'm like, hey, like, she doesn't want to talk to you. Like, can you just like do what she wants or whatever? And he's like, tell her that she will get exactly what she wants if she talks to me. So I tell her that exact thing and I try to hand her the phone and she just bats it out of my hand. And I, at this point, because of all of the stress of lack of sleep, of lack of like support, of feeling off kilter, of not understanding how any of these social like minutia is working, I just start to have a meltdown and I scream at the top of my lungs, yelling like, why are you doing this? Like, this is like what I do at this point. And my mom is just furious with me, and she reaches up to slap me because I dared to have a meltdown. And well, I learned martial arts as a kid growing up, and so I block her. And then she tries it on the other side, and I block her. And she looks down at her arms and she goes, ow, you hit me. And I'm just like dumbfounded. Like, I'm just like,
That's not how that works, Ria's mom.
yeah, I am completely dumbfounded. And so then she grabs one of those like rubber cat toys that you kind of like shake, and she just starts to whip me with it. And so I lock myself in the bathroom after that, after I run away from her with a phone in my hand. And for situations that I can't like describe because it's not important, there was no one able to come and get me. No one else in my family was available that I knew the numbers to. So my father wasn't available. No one was available. And so I call my friend that was earlier in the story and I'm like, hey, like, can you like get me? I don't feel safe. Like, this happened. And he talks to his mom and he basically goes, we can't come get you because she could claim that we were like going to kidnap you or whatever. And I'm like, dang it. I guess I have to actually like call the authorities. And my mom like hears me about to do this. Like, I'm on the phone like calling 911, and then she like, this is one of those bathrooms that the lock is one of like a push lock where like you can put a match through and it makes the door open. It's just the lock is for just deterring people from just walking in, not like from actually like locking people from being able to get in the room. And I sat my butt next to the door because I knew she could do that. And I'm calling the authorities and she overhears me trying to do that. So like she pushes it in to be able to get in. And then she's like essentially between the door and the wall, she's like trying to get in to grab the phone to hang it up like she's Jack Nicholson in The Shining, being like, here's Johnny, literally like trying to get me.
I was literally thinking, here's Johnny.
And I'm like essentially trying to push back to keep her out and like kind of sandwiching between her and the door. And eventually she realizes that the cops are going to come now. And so she runs away to my grandmother's. The cops take pictures, like, charges are pressed. I choose not to, but this end up makes me leave my mother's life. And everything that kind of happened in this story, like, plus the preamble that I gave you about the sensory unwell, explains kind of the root of my trauma. And how, like, unrelated to my identities, I had a trauma stuff. Let me, like, go into my, like, identity stuff now and see how, like, I already did to an extent, but I want to like then kind of tell my trans narrative and how that kind of overlaps with this. I told you how I first learned about being trans. I learned that it was something to hide. With my mom, I learned that I had to hide to try to keep myself safe or she would do what she did. Like, there's this parallel. I also learned that I couldn't be who I wanted to be because, like, if I was who I was naturally, people judged me. whether that was like my femininity or like my unmasked
Mm-hmm.
neurodivergent self. Both people judged me. My mom judged me. We call this minority stress and kind of interwoven intersectional marginalized identity stuff where it just compounds and compounds. This is, as a narrative therapist, I talk about often with my clients simulacra or simulation. And what a simulacra is an idea that's in your head, like, for example, that Disneyland or Disney World is the happiest place on earth. That is an idea that lives in your brain. And when you go to Disney World and you see all of the wonderful pageantry that kind of reinforces that idea, that is assimilation. And both of these things have a relationship where they feed into each other. And in the Matrix, when Morpheus is going to Neo, when he like pulls the band-aid and shows what the real world is, he's like, "Welcome to the desert of the real."
Interest invoked. I love the Matrix.
He's referring to the point where a simulacra and simulation get to the point where it becomes hyperreal, and the actual reality of things doesn't matter anymore. This is reference to a philosopher. His book is Simulacra Simulation, in his theory of the hyperreal. Like, it's all woven in the Matrix. How this relates to narrative therapy and these narratives that I'm talking about is when you have multiple different things that are reinforcing these ideas, you feel like it's real. You have this idea of who you are in your head, the simulacra, and then the simulation of the way people treat you reinforces that. And people literally think that they are terrible people because the people around them are judging them and treating them as such, even though they didn't do anything other than just be different. I feel like that I could just kind of tell by how you moved. I feel like you have something to say about that.
Oh gosh, just processing all of it and thinking about how, like, with the Matrix and the whole point of those films is that you've got this reality that's kind of superimposed over you, and it's not real. It's what you think is real. And something that I think about a lot as a neurodivergent person is there's a lot of things in the world that I feel like we're just really good at seeing through it. And that's one of the reasons that we get, bullied and made to feel othered, is because we're a threat to the power that be in the systems, because we're just like, it doesn't have to be like this. We just kind of decided that it was. I mean, we're also victim to it just as much as anybody else. We're affected by it, but there are some things that we just kind of see through. Like, one for me that I think about a lot is, like the whole concept of money. It's like, why is poverty a thing? It doesn't have to be. We've just decided that it is because people owe money, and if they can't pay, they're in poverty and they're in debt. But there's nothing actually backing that up in material reality, That's just one example of many.
Mm-hmm. And I think we see through it, but also they impose it on us. And we almost have to treat it like it's real because of how much, like, especially when we're talking about the interpersonal issues, about how much it overlaps and how much it affects us. And I had a narrative that I have been unlearning through my own personal journey and work, thinking that I had to do things in order to, one, be worthy of love. That whole like doing what my mom wanted me to do, to be desired by people in school, because like I got praise academic even if my peers judged me. The only thing that I saw that was valuable was what I did, and everything else about me I felt was treated like it was bad, undesirable, that I was less than. And I felt that I was less than because I wanted to be something that I wasn't. So, with my gender and sexuality journey, I felt like I had to do everything but be myself to prove that I got like almost permission to be like trans. I was a bodybuilder.
Mhm.
Before transition, I benched 300 or almost 300, and I deadlifted almost 400. Like, I had this big masculinity thing.
Woo.
Another thing was I tried to do the gamer bro thing. Like, I was trying to find a way that I could interface with masculinity that felt good and that felt like I could be it. But what ultimately ended up happening was more that I just had
Mhm.
interests that, like, I, as an autistic person, felt like that I could enjoy, but I couldn't actually interface with the gender component. Yeah.
Yeah, and another thing that's interesting hearing you talk about that with like ways to be an acceptable version of you. I remember before you transitioned, you had this whole like very gentlemanly aura because that was a way to get a little bit closer to that femininity. Like you did the really fancy like shaving ritual and everything. And now you get to do things like makeup and grow your hair out and pick all these cute outfits and, you know, all the things that are actually what you want, but you got like closest approximation that you could that was socially acceptable. And I think that's something that I've seen a lot of trans people in my life have done something like that.
So I tried to do everything but actually transition. I had desires to be transition, like even when I was a very young child, and I forgot this like until I kind of looked back and we talk about adding context. When I was a young person, I forgot that I pushed my genitals inside myself because I didn't want them to be that way. And I didn't remember this until I was kind of experiencing those issues when I kind of confronted them as an adult. I had other trans memories of my stuff is complicated. I'm probably intersex, which I can kind of go into a whole nother day. But like I grew breasts in my first puberty. Again, if you're interested, like put in the comments and I'll kind of go into more detail in a future video or stream or something about that experience. But I had kind of two different puberties, and one of them was a more feminine one. And I grew like almost B cups when I was between like 10 and 11, just slowly over time. And I remember being really excited about it, but also so scared that I would be find out. And
Mm-hmm.
it just led to me just feeling like it was one more thing to hide. I couldn't hide any of my enthusiasm about that because then people would know. I felt like I couldn't hide I had to hide my chest and like kind of like roll my body over a little bit because I had to like
Mm.
no one could know. And it led to me having this kind of disconnect between like, hey, this part of me is becoming the way I want it to, but like I can't like share that, and it's just one more thing and one more thing and everything is just piling on. And then as I got older, I had a more masculine puberty that caused way more distress. Like when I had the gray on my face, I felt like I was having like an invasion of something that was like coming that I didn't want. And I remember that happening at the like I have these memories of it happening, but later in adulthood I I just pretended like it didn't until I re-remembered once I become more in touch with myself. And it just
Mm-hmm.
it's that moment of like getting unplugged from the matrix. Like you have this narrative that you have to be a certain way or you have to do things a certain way, and then all of a sudden you take the real red pill and not the BS like conservative version, and you see how far the rabbit hole goes.
You mean the version that the Wachowski sisters actually intended, as opposed to the way that some odd people decided to interpret it?
Yeah. And I just, so many different things came back. When I was in my teens, I was reading Ranma One Half, and I just had this wistful feeling about wishing I had the curse. Maybe then I could bargain and like, oh, I could still be this guy and not disappoint people in my life and not be seen as like an other, but then I can be me, like sometimes too, and just kind of have this like bargaining thing. And then I got to college and I had this human sexuality class with a professor that Fox and I both TA'd for. She had a guest talk about gender, and
Mm-hmm.
she was a 50-something-year-old trans woman that looked gorgeous. Actually, eventually, when I transitioned, I became the person that was doing that with actually Fox as well. And we talked about trans and queer issues with the class. But when I saw her when I was in college, I just looked at her and I was like, forking shirt balls. I can't not do it. I don't have any excuse. If she can do it in her 50s and look that good, then I can do it. And then I just kind of took that thought and I was like, that's a problem for future Rhea. And then I did the bodybuilding and all the things and tried to
Hi,
like,
Futuria.
hi. But I did all these things to deny this egg crack moment. I taped it back together because I wasn't ready to like truly accept it until I just couldn't anymore. I felt so miserable
Mm-hmm.
being this person that was hiding in the shadows, living a half life, that I felt so drained and so disconnected and so dissociated from myself. Then I decided, you know what? I have to live. And that was the beginning, and Fox was integral in helping me through that process. Actually, when I came out to Fox, I
Aww.
literally just came over to their place without even telling them that I was trans, where I just like showed up in like clothing that was gender affirming and just like, yo, what up? My name's Rhea now.
Mhm.
Like, haters gonna hate.
Yeah. Oh my God. Can I tell it from my perspective? Because it's actually a pretty funny story. So literally, like we said we were gonna hang out that day. At that point in our lives, we were hanging out really, really frequently, like at least once a week. In addition to our like gaming group that we started, usually like 2 or 3 times a week. Honestly, basically, oh, I don't have a job currently, and you're off from work right now because like odd schedules. Sweet, let's hang out. So we were going to, and I lived in an apartment with my best friend and my ex at the time. And so she called the apartment gate to have me let her in because like it would, show up on my phone. I would press a button, it would let her in, and I was just like, oh, is this dead name? And she was just kind of quiet for a second, like dead silent, and was just like, I'm here. And I was just like, all right, cool. And I didn't know exactly what was up, but I could kind of tell that something was up because she seemed off to me, right? And then, she pulls around, gets to my building, parks. I come out and come down the stairs, get into her car, like slide in the front passenger seat, see her in this like awesome like hoodie dress looking absolutely fabulous, and she just kind of like smiles at me a bit and says, it's Rhea now. And I was just like, oh. Like suddenly get it. And then we literally went to the mall and went shopping. It was an amazing day.
Yeah. And those are those moments of joy that kind of like go against the narrative. It start where you're starting to write you had the world and your experience kind of passively write your story because like you had all of these things that would happen. But then when you start to live and when you start to actually like see through the simulation and you start to try to write your own story, that's when you start to challenge it and take power into your hands. And that's what my kind of narrative therapy stuff is all about when I work with my clients, is that I get people to not only recontextualize and like get better understanding of what has been, but then to actively choose where they want to go. There's kind of these three questions with like Buddhist teaching that I kind of use to help people with like kind of thinking about these narratives. It's like, where have I been? That's the past narrative. Where am I now? Like, how do I view the things that have happened to me now that I have lived through it and I've been on the other side of it? and like maybe even frame it like I'm talking to like me now, talking to me as a kid, and kind of, okay, well, now that I have more understanding, where am I now? And where, in like kind of trying to heal that inner child through recontextualizing and re understanding. And then where do I want to go? That's the third question. And kind of deciding, well, now that I have this new understanding, what does that mean to me? What am I trying to build? What new behaviors am I going to do to serve me instead of the ones that didn't serve me that I learned from the problem laden experience from the past? That moment that you shared is an example of taking life by the pen and actually rewriting it.
Mm-hmm.
I am just so thrilled and so happy that I can help people like me unpack this narrative that they didn't choose, that was put upon them, and give them the power to externalize it, to look at it, to like see the code of it, like Neo, and then to make a choice and be like, well, actually, I don't agree with that. Actually, that was BS. That was unfair. Like, now I know that because I'm an autistic kid, I know that I'm allowed to be awkward and not understand things and like to take a space to request people like explain the joke. I'm allowed to do that. Those are things that people can do to change their life by changing their understanding. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
just so happy that that's a thing that can happen. I guess I should kind of talk more about the trans stuff though. So I started transitioning on, like, if you want to talk about medically, on May 16th, 2016. And I know this date because it is the same date that somebody posted about me
Oh
on
no.
Kiwi Farms.
Kiwi Farms. Oh my god.
For people that don't know, Kiwi Farms is basically a hate forum for minorities. Luckily, it was a thread where people just post about like a lol cows is what they call that. Basically people that like they're farming for the laughs. It was a thread where people post about their personal lol cows, scare quotes, and it didn't like go anywhere. I didn't get my own thread, but like I had a couple people comment saying that I was this terrible person just because this person wrote what they wrote about me. And you know, there's always a chance when someone talks about you on that website that it will go in the direction of becoming this big thing. And lucky for me, it didn't. And I hope it continues to stay that way. But, you know, it is what it is. But I started medically transitioning that day. I've been doing it for, I guess, going on 9 years soon.
We actually got together the same year that she started her medical transition. Yeah.
Yeah. I did the boy emoting in private with just the people who saw me for a little while, but it got to a point where I just couldn't do it anymore. And I did the very stupid thing of going to work with a full face of makeup one day, being a
Oh my
waitress that
god.
works at a country breakfast place in the heart of one of the most like conservative areas in the city that we live in. Like we live in mostly a blue dot, but there's this conservative like cluster in the blue dot. And I decided that that country breakfast place where, you know, all these good old boys were there, that I'm gonna go from being a guy to wearing a full face of makeup without telling anybody, because I had dysphoria like brain rot, and I had to just be like, nope, gotta change it, throw it away, like. And luckily my boss at the time was not this like terrible person.
Oh gosh, I was just gonna say we can't tell any of the specific details without making it very obvious where we live, but literally the town that we're talking about is one of those places that is known for being absurdly conservative. Like to the point where they're kind of hilarious, like what even is this stories about the place.
Yeah, like notable people that believe they're like the reincarnation of Robert E. Lee kind of crazy conservative shenanigans.
Literally, it's so bad.
in our town square, we literally have Confederate flags there. Like, that's how bonker balls the suburb that we grew up in was like.
Yeah.
I decided it would be a good idea to just like transition without telling anybody. Luckily, people took it well. I was told basically to like keep it under wraps for a little while until my body changed more and more, because I think I was at like 3 months on hormones at that point. And then once I legally changed my name for whatever reason in my boss's head, that was like the point where I could present. For whatever reason, that was his decision, and I had to like keep it very natural on the makeup, because the first day I definitely went to the nines and it was kind of cray.
Early transition makeup stage where you're like, I'm going to have all the fun with all the colors and live my best 12-year-old girl life, because we've all been there, including AFAB kids who wore makeup at some point. So much glitter, so many colors.
Yeah, I started to feel more comfortable in myself as the trans thing went along. Dysphoria actually changes as you kind of have. I experienced kind of this very numb dysphoria where like I just didn't have any opinions about myself prior to transition. And then I had experienced euphoria and was very excited. And also because I didn't know what the hormones would do exactly, I kind of had this like anything can happen idea. And so my dysphoria went way down for a little while, with the exception of being seen as a guy by people, because I didn't know what would happen with the hormones. But eventually you kind of find out what the hormones won't do, and then the dysphoria goes way up. With time, it gets better. It gets like you kind of come to terms with it. I've talked about it before in other videos in this launch, which, by the way, you should like and subscribe and share these videos around, any ones that you find that you really enjoy, to help like with the channel. And for just $1 a month, you can join the patron Discord server and tell me about like your transition stuff. Or you can do it in the comments.
And me, because I'm on there too.
Yeah. I've said in other videos kind of how you can kind of start to reframe dysphoria and like how it can get better. And it has. But to kind of get to like the end of the story, like at 2 years, I felt like I was most of the way there with my like seeing myself. But then for some reason at year 4 and 5, my bust continued to grow randomly, and I was like, gosh darn. Yeah, most trans girls are done in 2 years, and I randomly had more, and I was happy about that. Like, not to brag or anything. I'm sorry, ladies, if that isn't your experience. But for me, that was just mine, and I was really excited about it. The other kind of stuff that's happening now is this year, and I'll try to have videos that will like post while I'm doing this, but I'm gonna have my gender confirmation or lower surgery this year, after like basically almost at my 9 year anniversary. By the time I'm done being
That's
in
so exciting.
by the time I'm done being in California, I will have been at 9 years. And that is amazing. I'm so happy. I'm also going to get facial feminization surgery this year.
Yay.
Like, all of the things are happening. I'm gonna like take y'all through the process. But I want you again to kind of like, we're getting closer to wrapping up. And I just want to highlight how you have someone who feels like the world is just going on them, that you have no control. Everyone is just telling you who you are, what your life is, what like you have to be. And when you decide, nah, forget that, I'm going to pick up the pen. I'm going to write. I'm going to stand on my values and my principles and use those as my guiding light, lantern in the darkness, like Amnesia Dark Descent, like tier stuff. And like essentially using that to help you decide what you believe. And it will just open so many doors for you. It will help you challenge so many learned ways of being by like basically deciding, no, like You move, to quote a shitty Captain America comic, which I'm sure is fine, but I've never read and just wanted to meme. And yeah, that's the experience. I guess, babe, before we go, do you have anything that you want to share with the audience about the themes that we've kind of talked tonight?
Yeah, so I've been thinking a lot about my own past and especially the years that were around the same time that you were talking about when we were teenagers together. And there's a couple things. Like, one, you brought up the whole it gets better thing, like it's this magical thing that happens. And the whole, like, if you remember the It Gets Better campaign, that really started when I was in high school. And I remember seeing all these videos of queer people saying literally it gets better, and it was targeted to kids like us who were facing like this rise of homophobia and transphobia, like getting even worse than it was, but talking about how, as you grow up you get more choices in your life. If you're a kid, you're just kind of stuck and you don't get to make many decisions. You don't get to pick where you go to school. You don't get to pick who your family is. You don't get to pick any of that. But as you get older, you get a little bit more power, a little bit more power. And eventually you get to the point where you find people who really do understand you and love you and value you for who you are, and don't try to make you be someone you're not. And, going with that, something my dad always told me, because again, I was very, very lucky to have a very supportive, loving family. My dad always told me, it may feel like nobody understands you right now, but you'll find the right people and they're going to love you. And I'm still very lucky that I'm still close with my two best friends from high school, in addition to Ria, in my 30s. A lot of us don't get that, but because I found the right people, some of them, and I've continued to find more and more people who understand as I've gotten older, I've been able to really live that and experience that. And I remember at the time thinking, yeah, right, dad. Yeah, right, random gay and lesbian people on the internet. It's not going to get better. I'm a weirdo. No one gets me. But God, I hate admitting it, but they were right. It did in fact get better. The state of the world might be scary right now for a lot of us, but at least in my personal life, things have gotten better. And as for the state of the world, that's why we're doing what we're doing. That's why we're sharing our stories. It's so that nobody has to grow up or, exist feeling like they're alone in this, because we've all been there.
Exactly. The world itself might be chaos. There might be fires, like, metaphorically or maybe even literally burning around you, but you can make moves to make your personal life as good as it can be. You can challenge the things that ultimately don't serve you and build what you can. Actually, you brought up a thing that I often talk about with my clients is that a lot of these narratives are born from times when you don't have a lot of say in who or what is in your life. But we often will carry things forward that no longer serve us from times that are no longer, like, it's no longer needed. And I find that turning the page and saying that, like, all things exist in time and the time for this thing to be the way it is over. It's part of, like, if you've ever done hypnotherapy, a very common kind of induction thing, like when you're kind of coming up again through the healing experience, that, like, putting things in time and context is a part of that. And I think even in the narrative, it's really important to be like, hey, that isn't relevant anymore. You have so much more control over who and what is in your life. And it's really beautiful. Thank you for
Yeah.
listening, everyone. Again, if you found this useful, if you found the experience that I have given you is something you can relate to and use to shape you, it's obviously something that I would prefer if you used it as more like a mirror. hold it up to you and decide what it means to you instead of being like, that's exactly how I feel because Rhea and Fox felt that way. Like, no, you need to use people's experiences as something to hold up against you, not like become like your thing, even if it feels right. I need you to make sure that you do the investigation, that you know that whatever you decide from listening to other people's experience is right for you. It can't be a one to one. And I want you to like really, really consider that, especially if you're a young person that is still building your identity. That's narrative is still like a little bit like wetter ink because it's not dry yet. Like I want you to really, really focus on not taking on other people's things. Use that as a creation comparison rather than like taking whole cloth. So if you found this useful, please like, please subscribe, please share it around. If you've gotten all the way to the end of this long video, I want you to post the fireworks emoji to show that you've gotten to the end of this long video. And again, thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye. Bye bye. Well, that's the end of the video. It's also the last edit of my launch, but that doesn't need to be your last video of the launch. Please, if you haven't seen the other videos, give them a watch. Also, as I said before, like, subscribe, share it around, especially right now at the beginning. I really, really appreciate all the support I'm getting, especially the patron support before I even release a video. Wow, y'all have a lot of trust in me. Speaking of that patron support, only $1 a month will get you into that Discord community, and $5 or more will get you a name in the credits, along with other perks for the higher tiers. I really, really appreciate y'all. Thank you so much. Goodbye.